Joining us today to talk about future debates in education choice are Senator Scott Herndon, Representative Lance Clough, Senator Janie Ward Engelking, and Senator Ben Adams. Representative Clough, I want to start with you. We just heard from the governor and other education leaders talking about the Empowering Parents Grant Program. How might future school choice proposals loop in that grant program?
Well, I can say that the education savings account that I call it Idaho Opportunity Grant does tie in a little bit, because the Empowering Parents Grants does not allow the use of tuition for those funds. And in the bill that I'm working on, I'm saying if they're applying for the Idaho Opportunity Grants, they can use the money for tuition in that case, up, their $1,000 limits. So that's about the only tie-in that I have on the bill that I've seen. I have heard stories about an Empowering Parents Grants expansion, but I don't have the details to share on that.
And if I could just respond to that. When we put the Empowering Parents Grant in place last year, one of the things we were very careful about, because it was federal money last year, but we knew going forward it would probably be general fund money. And we were very careful to make sure that private school tuition was not listed as one of the options, because once you open that door, then you've also opened it to religious schools. And so that was a conscious effort for us not to do that last year. So I think there'd be a strong debate about that.
Since you brought up religious schools, this is something that has come up in various discussions about school choice legislation using public dollars for private school tuition. Senator Herndon, how has that landscape changed for using those public dollars for religious schools?
Well, the Supreme Court has weighed in on it, and so we know for a fact that if we send state money to private schools, then we cannot discriminate against religious schools as well. And the way I look at our Idaho constitutional requirement, when it talks about our mandate to participate basically in K through 12 education, there's 327,000 people, kids in that K through 12 space eligible in Idaho. 300,000 of them participate in the current public school system, and I think our mandate is for all 327,000 as far as eligibility for our constitutional mandate and any programs we offer. So that would get into private schools, including religious schools, and even involve those who homeschool.
Except our Constitution says public, common, free schools. It doesn't say, and in fact, it's very clear. Article 9, Section 5 is very clear that that we don't send any public funds to secular or religious schools whatsoever. So it's problematic. We'd have to do some changing of the Constitution, I think, to do that. We open the door to private, and we can't discriminate against religious, but I think our founding fathers were very clear they wanted us to fund public schools, K-12.
One thing I want to weigh in on is the AG's office somewhat disagrees because of the Supreme Court rulings on that question. And so when we talk about if we're going to move into that area, as Senator Herndon explained, the Supreme Court has said if we're going to do both, or one, we have to do both. And I understand that if we start doing private schools, we can't exclude the religious schools. But I also feel that when our Constitution was written, the first part of that was the importance of having an educated population. We want everybody educated. And the difference was in the beginning of our constitutional statehood is that the only people that were getting educated officially were not in free common schools, they were private schools. And so they just wanted to make sure everyone else had a choice. And then along came the Blaine amendments that Senator Ward Engelking is referencing that put a damper on being able to fund those schools. But back in the beginning, free common schools were defined basically as 8-year-olds to 14.
And I think we ought to pick up on the goal, and we just talked about that briefly, is the intelligence of the people. So that's our goal. Our goal is performance of students. So anything that we do contemplate regarding educational choice is about improving the performance of Idaho students. That's the goal. So I think we all share that in common.
Senator Adams, I want to bring you into the conversation. And one of your concerns this week on the specific education savings account bill that appeared in front of the Senate was that it included homeschooling families, and that might open a door for government intrusion into homeschooling freedoms that families currently enjoy under the current system. Can you explain your concerns a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was 40 years ago that it was illegal to we were having people arrested in this state for homeschooling their kids. And so, as a result of that, the legislature came in and made it very clear that the state was not going to be involved in private education in terms of what they're teaching and what they're allowed to do. They weren't going to require testing or reporting, things like that. And that's something that has blossomed into a beautiful, unregulated school system inside Idaho. And because of the history of it, there's a lot of hesitation from the homeschool community to ever open up any door that could lead to homeschoolers or private schools falling under those requirements of the state. And so almost any program, whether it's federal or state, if it falls under the Department of Education, then there's probably going to be a lot of pushback there.
And I think that's true, that there could be that, because when we send out public money, when we're using public funds, we're responsible to the taxpayers, and they expect accountability, and they want to see accountability. We see it all the time in the public school system, the public charter and the public traditional schools. We have to be accountable. We have to do testing. We have reports to fill in. And so I think that when public funding, taxpayer dollars, is being used, there has to be some kind of accountability.
Yeah.
We should say about accountability, right now the reading, science, and math performance of Idaho students is in the 30 percentile range on a number of test measures. So when we talk about accountability, I think we're talking about the money getting to where we intend it to go. We're not talking about the money being attached to the actual results of student performance. Going back to the homeschool front, I moved to Idaho because of Idaho's great homeschooling freedom. I personally think we should probably include that in the Idaho Constitution, and so I'm actually having a constitutional amendment drafted to make sure that's protected for homeschooling parents. Regardless of what happens with any of these educational choice options, I think we're always going to have to be on guard on behalf of homeschooling parents to make sure that they continue to enjoy freedom in that space. And I had mentioned on the Senate floor this week that if our bill that we considered earlier this week had passed the Senate, I was not planning to participate in that program because, frankly, I would leave the resources for families who actually need the resources, and I think that's our other intent too.
Well, and to be honest, homeschooling families can take advantage of, of their traditional school activities, extracurricular. They can do music. They can come in and do testing if they want. We provide all that. They're allowed to use any of the curriculum that they want. So we provide quite a bit of freedom for homeschooling families to pick and choose, and I think that's good. But when we start moving into private and religious schools, then it gets a little more complicated, I think.
On accountability, though, I think we need to point out that we're talking about programs, these education savings account style programs, and saying that we need accountability. So in the bill that I was working on, and I'm actually working on a slight different version this morning, but it does have some accountability. It requires the schools to provide nationally normed tests to the parents. The parents must sign an affidavit that they've gotten it, so the parents at least know. That doesn't go far enough for some, so I'm most likely going to be changing that to say, and the parent must provide a copy of their test results. On the other
Would
side,
that also include homeschooling families?
I'm just almost there. Yeah. In the bill that I've been working on, I don't refer to homeschools. I didn't say this program does not include anybody in homeschooling. But what I say, if you want this money and you can sign up for a personalized student education plan, which is a design plan, and in that, they must provide nationally normed tests, and they must show us their test scores, and they must show that they're at grade level or showing growth because they're using the state money.
And Senator Adams, real quick, I wanted to ask you, moving forward into the future, would you support any bill that includes homeschooling families in a school choice program?
Yes, actually. So I'm one of those Republicans that's not convinced. I think the ESAs have worked really well in some states, but because we have the level of freedom that we have here in that homeschool arena, the ESA model is problematic. But I do think there are ways outside of that we can fund school choice in the state of Idaho without the strings.
What would that look like?
It would probably look like a refundable tax credit.
And just, I think the elephant in the room is that we've underfunded public education for years in Idaho. We've been 51st in the nation, and our students have still performed better than average, the national average. But we have, almost $1 billion in deferred maintenance in our school buildings, and we're 51st in the nation. I don't believe we have the funds right now to take on private schools and religious schools at this point. And now maybe down the road when maybe when we're in the middle of the pack as far as funding per pupil, it might be a conversation that would be more relevant.
Senator Ward Engelking, Democrats have mostly been opposed to ESA and similar programs for the specific reasons that you mentioned. Yeah. This school choice or vouchers or ESAs or whatever you are focusing on, that's gaining popularity and gaining momentum, not just in Idaho, but around the nation. Are there any proposals that would be palatable to your caucus?
Yes, I did support the Empowering Parent Grant, and I think we're looking at putting $30 million towards that again this year, and that provides an avenue for parents to get devices and curriculum and tutoring and lessons that they need, and I'm okay with that. I'm also okay with the 529 plan. We provide $12,000 per year per student, tax-free money if parents want to put that in a savings account, or grandparents or even employers can donate to that for their employees. So we have put quite a few things in place. There might be some other things that we can do.
I'd like to weigh in there because we do not provide $12,000 a year to people in 529 plans. And people heard that. People can put $12,000 a year and get some tax benefits from it.
Tax-free. Sorry, you're right. Absolutely.
I think we should just weigh in that one of the reasons that's motivating ESAs as a school choice option is because when I look at my 8 children, they're all very different. And what we've designed in a lot of schools is a system that looks very similar and uniform for every type of kid. And so what we want to do is we want to provide options for those kids who do learn differently. And really everybody does learn differently. And so that's what we want to use to increase the success of our children, is really respond to the vast differences between them.
And I agree with Senator Herndon. That's exactly true, and that's why we have open enrollment. That's why we have charter schools and magnet schools and flexible schedules and apprenticeships and internships and career technical schools. We are trying to meet that need in a variety of ways for all of our parents.
Real quick on 529s, because one of the challenges with 529s is the federal program, right? And so just from the baseline, that kind of moves homeschoolers out of the arena.
Interesting.
I want all the students in Idaho to have this opportunity, right? And so again, these will be discussions obviously that we'll have going forward, but just wanted to put that out there.
We have about a minute left. With all of these varying factors, plus all of the other opinions at the State House with 101 of your colleagues, do you think we are going to have a compromise this session?
I would say that's going to be challenging this session. I think we all probably are interested in a strategic long-term goal of getting where we want to be. I think it's probably going to take more than one session to get there.
Well, I'm hopeful. I'm going to be reintroducing next week, and we'll see how that goes.
Well, and I would agree. I don't think we're quite there. I think we need to listen to stakeholders and parents and students even, and see what we can do to move forward.
I anticipate seeing multiple versions of school choice legislation this year. We might not get one that we have consensus on, but it moves that needle to where next session when we come in.
All right. Well, thank you to all four of you for joining us for this great conversation. We'll be here for all of those introductions. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.